We are getting new reports of Democrats' internal concerns about President Biden's decline and the apparent effort by his closest allies to keep those concerns hidden. ABC News is reporting that multiple people who attended the White House Juneteenth concert just 17 days before the debate said that they had concerns after personally watching Biden. A Democratic state lawmaker reportedly said, quote, "We didn't know quite what to make of it, but we thought that it was different and that he seemed altered." State lawmakers and a former Obama official reportedly described Biden at the event as, quote, "aloof and stiff," and his speech garbled. And we're now learning powerful Democrats are reportedly furious at Biden's inner circle. They say his allies have been hiding his decline.
What my colleagues and I have really reported on is there is a lot of anger and the blame that is being placed on the inner circle of advisors and family members around the president. And what these people say is this really painstakingly choreographed and stage managed daily operations at the White House around the president that is set up specifically designed to prevent the public from often seeing the president in these extended, unscripted settings. And one thing that many of the folks that we spoke with that they are so furious about is this idea that when people have gone to these inner circle of advisors around the president to express some of these concerns, that they were not taken seriously or really brushed aside. This is what one top Democrat told me. They said everyone who expresses any level of suspicion or contrary views, they call everyone and they beat them and say, stay on message. Now, it is not just the inner circle of advisors that is getting a lot of this heat. It is also members of the president's family who, of course, have been up there, really standing by the president's decision to so far stay in this race.
So, Todd, it's not just them keeping him hidden from the polls. He doesn't seem to be given the actual polls. But now we're finding out that there's retaliation happening.
Does this officially end the narrative that has been existing for decades that Joe Biden is just old Uncle Joe from Scranton, common man Joe? Let's be real. Joe Biden is part of and in charge of, if you believe he's actually in charge of anything, the most Machiavellian administration in history. Let's be brutally honest what this is all about. They do not care about the taxpayers that pay their salary to keep them in office, to have them do the job of president. They do not necessarily care about anything other than getting power and holding on to power. This is all about Jill Biden making sure that she can remain first lady because it feeds her ego. This is all about Hunter Biden making sure daddy's in power so that we can maintain the ability for me to get a pardon/commutation. And this is all about Joe Biden, who for 82 years has felt insecure about his place in the government because he's not the smartest guy. He didn't go to the best schools. This is all an attempt for him to feel good. Yeah. And the interests of the country don't matter, it seems.
Right. Well, Emily, let me tell you this. We've now learned, first off, this Milwaukee radio station. We have now learned that the station said that it edited President Biden's interview at the campaign's request. They actually did that. And then we also were learning that a close look at more than 24 radio and podcast interviews given by Mr. Biden over the past 2 years, Emily, 2 years, that they actually, appearance after appearance, he was served up nearly identical questions, pre-screened or suggested ahead of time by campaign staff members, and in nearly every case, the questions set the president up to deliver on-message talking points without notable flubs. Incredible.
So the way that the story has been told, and now that we're sort of learning what's behind the scenes, it's that began as a seeming protection, and then it developed into deception. And then it came from deception into, your point, downright aggression, right? So the end of the day, though, I posit that it's not just this president or his small group of close advisors and the first lady or the like. This is the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party is not the one that we grew up with or not the one that our parents grew up with. It is a machine, an unforgiving, cruel, toxic machine. And the notion that you're able to either think for yourself, as we've seen, has been punished, whether you're in the media, whether you have a D before your name and you've dared to say your own mind, whether you have a certain type of skin color and dared to vote a different way. You are reminded that the Democrat Party stands for lockstep. And within that lockstep is the tight control of the protection, deception, aggression of everything behind the scenes with this president. So to this point, I just say that take it the next step, which is the next president will be exactly the same. There's a manufactured quality to them and the entire narrative. It is not going anywhere, so make sure you vote with an R next to the name, and you tell your neighbors to do so also.
I'll tell you what, Tommy, if you listened last night to House Intelligence Committee ranking member Jim Himes, he's from Connecticut, he's a Democrat. He last night came out after the president's news conference and said, basically, I can't support this anymore. Listen to what he said on MSNBC.
It's really not about tonight. And one of the really kind of sick aspects of this moment is that we are watching every speech, every rally, every debate, and saying, how did he do today? And that's just not the way to think about the presidency of the United States.
Right. As of today, 18 Democrats have now said they are no longer with President Biden.
They feel comfortable in doing so. But I want to go back to the radio stations, the Milwaukee radio stations that edited at the White House request. The White House would only ask for that if the White House thought they were going to get that. So to me, when people are talking about his allies and the people closest to him, coddling him and shielding him, I actually don't put that much blame on them, because what else are they supposed to do? They work for the president. What are they now? They feel comfortable kind of throwing him to the wolves. But prior to that, their job is in some regards to insulate him. So I understand that that's part of their job. I don't like it. I feel deceived as an American, but I understand it. What I don't understand, and I give no grace for, is the media members who have for the last several years been willing to take direction from the White House and edit things out and deceive the American people, because their job as members of the media is not to work for the White House. The fact that the White House felt so comfortable making these requests or even demands, that's what worries me. Long after Biden's gone, or Kamala, or whoever, we still have a majority of the media that's been complicit in this, and that's not going to go away with a new nominee. That's what, to me, is terrifying.
Well, Cassie, we have been reporting on this network and on Fox News, we have been reporting the state of this president. And I think what is interesting now is to see that White House press corps do a complete turnaround and go after, in particular, KJP, who has had a very, very bad couple of weeks.
Well, yeah, at least a couple of weeks have been worse than all the weeks before. And all that's changed is that the press has stopped covering for them, because this has been the game all along, and they've been part of it. What Emily and Tommy said is so right on. I worked on Capitol Hill as a comm staffer for 10 years. I was the press secretary at the RNC during Trump's first term. And I had a reporter I worked with a lot, and I actually consider him a very good, fair reporter. And we were getting drinks one time. That's kind of part of the game. And he said, I hate working with Democrats on stories, because if it is anything less than 100% glowing, I hear about it. I get requests, every semantic quote. And Republicans are like, that was fair. We're good. We'll keep talking to you, because Republicans expect that it's not going to be fair. But this has been the game for a long time. And Emily, you hit on something really important that people need to remember. Do not forgive the press. Do not forgive the DNC, regardless of whatever happens after these 14 days or whatever. This is the game. They've been playing it long since before Donald Trump was president, and they will continue to play it, and they'll go right back to their antics.
But Emily, last word, does the turnaround that we have now seen in a moment, in a hot minute after that debate with the press, does that now affect the White House Communications Department? I mean, they've now lost their allies, basically.
Right. I think there was always a tension between the allyship of the White House press corps, or the journalists there, and the White House's attempt at control. I think now, yes, the tides have shifted, but I really respect your point so much. We covered here how Chuck Todd 2 years ago was told by a senior cabinet official there were mental acuity concerns. So the reality is that there was not some epiphany that happened simultaneously to everyone in the last 2 weeks. The reality is the evidence was there the entire time, on the record and often before their own eyes, and it's only taken now when someone felt brave enough to actually say something about it.
Well, he sat down with George Stephanopoulos, and now we learned that George Stephanopoulos is not on Team Biden anymore, thanks to that TMZ tape.
Right.
And we should also mention he's going to be sitting down with Lester Holt. So, is that going to be taped in 20 minutes and talking points? We're going to find out, everybody. We'll see.
Hey, everyone. I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.